Glyphosate, the world's most widely used weed killer, has been found in over 95% of oat-based children's cereals tested in the United States, including Cheerios and Quaker Oats, at levels far above what scientists consider safe for a child. And it's not listed anywhere on the label. You have no way of knowing it's even there. My guest today has been trying to warn us about this for over a decade. And honestly, she's one of the most credentialed people that you'll ever hear on this topic. She is a senior research scientist at MIT, where she's worked for over 50 years. She's got 4 MIT degrees, including her PhD in electrical engineering and computer science. So early in her career, she was known for pioneering work in speech and language technology. She was elected a fellow of the International Speech and Communication Association. So this isn't some fringe voice you're going to hear. This is someone with serious credentials who followed the data and didn't like where it led. She spent years using the same pattern finding tools that made her successful as a researcher at MIT to dig into something completely different. Why are autism rates exploding? Why are we seeing this wave of chronic disease, gut disorders, neurological problems, infertility? And what she found kept pointing to the exact same place, a chemical so widely used it's now in our soil, in our water, our food, and in our bodies, glyphosate. She wrote a book about it called Toxic Legacy. I think it's one of the most important books that not enough people have read. So in this interview, you're going to find out what glyphosate is actually doing inside your body at the cellular level. It's not what you'd expect. You're going to hear about a corruption that goes all the way from the Monsanto boardroom to the EPA. And you're going to walk away with real practical things that you can do this week to start protecting your family. Because that's why I do this show, not to scare you, but because once you actually understand how we got here and what decisions were made by who and why, you can make real choices for yourself, for your kids, and the people you love. Welcome to Man in America, a voice of reason in a world gone mad. On this show, I talk to real Americans with real solutions to the real problems that we're facing today. I help you connect the dots between the problems that we see in the present with decisions made by powerful people in the past. Because once we understand how we got here and what the real history of America actually is, we can remember where we came from. We can really learn from the past, and we can make real change for a better future. Now, before we start, please make sure you hit that like button. It helps a lot with the algorithms on whatever platform you're watching on. This helps to get this information out to more people. Also, please make sure you subscribe and share this with someone who really needs to hear it. Let me know what you think in the comments as well. And lastly, every show that I do is done as a podcast as well. So if you want to listen instead of watch, just go to your favorite podcast app. And if you use Apple Podcasts and you want to really do me a favor, leave a review on there. Actually, Apple really prioritizes podcasts that have those reviews. So if you like the show, leave a review. It'll help me reach even more people. All right, so let's get into this interview right now with my guest, Dr. Stephanie Seneff. Stephanie, it's such an honor to have you on the show, and I really appreciate your work, and just thank you for giving us your time today. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
I am too. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you helping to get the word out.
Absolutely. So you have a very decorated background, I would say, as a scientist and as a researcher. And if I'm not mistaken, you've been a researcher and you've worked with MIT for nearly around 5 decades. So older than
Yeah,
I
I've
turned
been
40
with
this week. So
MIT.
you've been there for longer than me alive. And so, but your background was, if I understand correctly, speech, computer science. But then you shifted from that into researching glyphosate. So do you want to
Quite
just
a
walk us through a
pivot.
little bit of this pivot, a little bit of your background to help kind of give us some
Yeah,
context for the discussion
yeah,
today?
it's pretty interesting. So all my degrees are from MIT, starting with an undergraduate degree in biology. And biology is my first love. I've always loved biology, but I actually got into the PhD program in biology. I was there for 1 year, way back when, and I couldn't do the biology lab. I was terrible at it, and I was really depressed. I was like, my life, is ruined. So I was so upset because I couldn't do biology. So I at that time, computer science was just a shadow. You could get a job with no training, which is what I did. I got a job at Lincoln Labs as a computer hacker, a computer coder, and they trained on the job. So, and I got enough experience at Lincoln Labs that then I got back into MIT PhD program in computer science, which is kind of amazing, from biology undergraduate to get into the computer science program because of my work at Lincoln Labs. So then I got my PhD, quite late. So And I had, I had 4 kids by the time I got my PhD. So I was very busy in my PhD program. And then I got the job at MIT after I graduated, and stayed the rest of the time. So it was first Lincoln Labs, which is also affiliated with MIT, and then MIT on campus for the rest of my career. And I did a lot of computer coding to develop conversational systems between humans and computers. We were the early birds in that whole system of the stuff that you hate when you get on the phone and the computer asks you all those questions. We're the source of that. We were the front runners in that space. I'm sad to say because I hate those.
Well, now it's all just AI, and you'll have
I
these
know.
complex conversations when you feel like you're talking to a real person. And you realize,
I
hold on,
actually
wait,
had
this
a
is an
conversation.
AI agent.
I had a conversation with a person, and it went quite a while before I said, "Are you a computer?" And I was like, I wasn't sure if it was a computer. They were so robotic that I thought, "Oh, maybe this is a computer," which was wild.
Yeah.
They have this kind of Turing experiment where you try to see if the guy behind the curtain is a computer or a human. We used to have those games back in the day when they were developing the technology to see if you could fool someone into thinking you were human. And now you can.
Well, maybe they should give their AI call centers like a Filipino English accent. So you'll
I
just think, oh, okay,
know.
this is obviously a call center in the Philippines, but you'll think it's an actual real person though.
That's right. That's a good trick. I think it's going to come to the point where we're not sure whether we're talking to a human or a computer, which is pretty
Yeah,
amazing. I mean,
yeah.
that technology just advanced so quickly. I was actually scared by 2007 that I wasn't going to be able to continue in that field because it was kind of out. It was chasing away my talents weren't necessarily useful anymore. People are feeling that now in a big way because you've graduated computer science. You can write a lot of code, and now it turns out the computer can write the code for you. And all that skill set that you thought was going to give you a career path is gone. I mean, it's like it's useless practically. I mean, it's getting to the point where it's probably pretty frightening for someone graduating right now in computer science to think, what am I going to do? What
Oh, I'm
role do I
sure.
play?
I'm
It's
sure.
quite upsetting. So I was recognizing already in 2007 that the kind of skills I had. Of course, I was old and learning new computer languages. It's not that easy. I was close to retirement age. I was thinking of retiring. It's kind of sad to think I wasn't quite 65 yet. Close enough. And then I pivoted. I was like, okay, I got to get out of computer science and do something else. And at the same time, I was watching the autism rates go up, and I was like, there's something wrong here. There's something going on. I was quite concerned. And why isn't the government concerned? And we need to figure this out. That kind of questioning. And I thought, well, with my computer science skills, I can do analysis of data sets and whatnot and try to look at correlations. So I sort of started with just kind of learning about autism, reading all the literature on autism to try to understand its symptoms, and then looking at various toxic exposures and seeing if there were correlations. I was just kind of playing that game for 5 years, from 2007 to 2012. And of course, I wasn't thinking of glyphosate at all. Glyphosate's safe. And that happened to be at a conference 2012 where Professor Don Huber presented a 2-hour presentation on glyphosate. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. I was so moved by it. I really felt like an epiphany. I found the answer. I got really focused, and I went back and read everything I could about glyphosate. And the more I read, the more it seemed obvious to me that it was the case. Not the only thing that's causing autism, but I think the biggest player. I think it's the biggest. And I've wondered whether that lately I've been paying attention to acetaminophen. You may know President Kennedy. I mean, not President Kennedy. I wish RFK Jr. Interesting slip. RFK Jr. Is pushing this concept of acetaminophen, which is Tylenol. Very, very interesting. And actually, I had written a paper back before I knew about glyphosate, linking Tylenol as a potential factor in autism. So I already saw the Tylenol factor, especially linked to the vaccines, because when you take the vaccine, the kid gets the vaccine, the doctor says, oh, take a Tylenol if he runs fever. Likely will have a fever in response to this vaccine, have him take a Tylenol. And Tylenol turns out to be, I think, an important factor. I've been looking more into it lately and really going back to it. And the thing is, Tylenol and glyphosate are synergistically toxic because glyphosate wipes out the enzymes in the liver that detoxify Tylenol.
Oh, interesting. And
Yeah, so
so
they're connected.
looking at, let's kind of start from just the kind of elementary, the foundational level. So glyphosate. So Back in, you mentioned that, say 2007 time, that time I had, also I was young, right? So I graduated from college in 2008. And so I wasn't looking at organic food and I wasn't thinking like that. Now, we grow a lot of our own food and we raise chickens, and we're very conscious of pesticides. We eat organic as much as possible. And so, but even now, my concept of glyphosate is like, oh, it's a poison, right? It's something that is bad for your body, and if it gets into your body, it's a toxin and it causes problems. But it's a very limited understanding. And I was doing an interview recently with a guy named I think it was Morley Robbins. He was talking about
Oh yeah, I
copper,
know.
and he was explaining how glyphosate was originally
Chelates copper. Yeah,
like a mineral stripper, basically. And so,
yeah,
can you kind of just give me the kind of glyphosate 101? Like, what is
yeah.
glyphosate? How did it start? How did it work its way into our food supply? Just help us kind of connect some of these dots here.
Yeah, and people may not even know glyphosate equals Roundup. And in fact, Roundup now doesn't have glyphosate in the US. They took it out because there was so much controversy around it. So Bayer sells a Roundup product now that's got a whole bunch of other chemicals in there instead of glyphosate. They're supposed to be more toxic than glyphosate. So they haven't really fixed the problem. But Roundup, but glyphosate is still used in agriculture. There's no regulation against that. And it's pervasive. It's pervasive in our food supply. My friend Zen Honeycutt has done testing of fast. She's Moms Across America. She founded Moms Across America. She's really a great person, and she's pushed hard on the message of glyphosate is bad. You need to go organic. She's really been shouting about that to the population. And she found 100% of fast food samples were contaminated with glyphosate, and 95% of the school lunch samples. So she's looking at common foods. It's all over the food supply, and it happened because what happened was they developed this. It's an herbicide. It kills all plants except for those that have been engineered through GMO technology to resist it. And those plants are the core crops of the processed food industry: the corn, the soy, the canola, sugar beets, alfalfa. Those are the key GMO Roundup Ready crops. And it's used extensively on all those crops. And it's also used as a desiccant on non-GMO crops. And that includes wheat and barley and legumes. So chickpeas and garbanzo beans, they come up sky high in glyphosate. And that was a surprise to me. I didn't realize to watch out for those. Some of the highest levels are in these legumes. And especially if you're a vegan, you're probably eating a lot of those. So that's going to be a problem. So anyway, they thought glyphosate was a wonderful solution to the problem of weeds because it's non-toxic. It's practically harmless to humans, and it can replace all those toxic herbicides that we used to use, which they did starting around the late 1990s because they rolled out those GMO crops. Roundup Ready, you can just spray the crop with the glyphosate, doesn't die. Very convenient. You don't have to worry about trying to hit the weeds and not the plants. Makes it much easier to control the weeds. And so it was such a boon to agriculture that it took off. And those plants, they started engineering. The GMO crops went up dramatically in the first decade of this century. They practically replaced the non-GMO versions of the corn and the soy and the canola. And meanwhile, the use of glyphosate went up dramatically at the same time, exponential growth in glyphosate use over the first 10 years of this century. And that's really when it started getting to be a huge problem. So 2007, and autism rates were going up exactly in step, perfect match. The p-value for the correlation between the rise in autism and the rise in glyphosate over that first decade is like 0.00007. There's several zeros before you get to the first significant value. It is incredibly perfect correlation.
Huge thanks to Rumble because they've never censored me. They've never, ever censored me before. It's never even been a question on the table with these guys. It doesn't matter whether I'm talking about Epstein or today's stuff or SRA or MKUltra. They truly have supported free speech, and I give them a lot of thanks for that. But they've also have done some things which you might be interested. Look, if you're into crypto, if that's kind of your thing, you might want to look into the Rumble wallet, right? So it's really just kind of a question of asking how much control you have over your money, right? So technologies changed, and it's changing how everything about how money is working, right? So crypto started as this niche, but it's really gone mainstream. Faster payments, more control for your middlemen. It's not just hype, it's where a lot of things are actually going. And if you're interested in crypto, getting started is easier than you think. So with Rumble Wallet, you can buy Bitcoin, you can hold dollar-backed stable coins, you can even own digital gold backed by real gold, all in one place. So it's a non-custodial crypto wallet, which means that you, not a bank or a platform, so you control access to your funds. The setup is simple. It connects you with MoonPay, so you can use your debit card, credit card, or bank account and be up and running in minutes. And for a limited time, you can start with $10 in US stablecoin by downloading the Rumble wallet and entering my exclusive promo code MIA10 when you sign up. So you can even use your Rumble wallet to support your favorite Rumble creators like me directly. So do this now. So scan the QR code or just click on the link in the description, which is wallet.rumble.com/MIA. So wallet.rumble.com/MIA and download your free Rumble wallet. From there, you can set up your wallet, enter your promo code MIA10 to get your $10 in US stablecoin. And it's a limited time offer. So act now. So take control of your money, get started with Rumble wallet today. There are some terms and conditions. You can see that information in the show description. What was glyphosate originally before they realized that they could take it and use it on crops? I mean, what were the origins of glyphosate?
Right. Good question. So it really goes quite a ways back. And initially they thought it made sense as a pipe cleaner. They used it to try to strip metal from pipes. It's a very good metal chelator, and that's part of its problem as well.
And what's a chelator?
It grabs hold of metals and won't let go.
I see.
It binds to them very tightly. And that includes copper and magnesium and manganese, zinc, all these critical nutrients. And also binds aluminum. And that's a problem too, because it can actually bind aluminum. If you have aluminum in your food, normally aluminum doesn't really leave the digestive tract, but glyphosate sets up a leaky gut, and then it binds to the aluminum and hides the +3 charge. Glyphosate is negatively charged. Two glyphosate molecules can wrap themselves around an aluminum atom and make it a neutral molecule, which is then much easier to get across that leaky barrier. So it ships the aluminum out into the circulation. I think it ends up in the pineal gland and messes it up. So I think pineal gland collects aluminum over time. And that's really bad because it can destroy it.
And so how does glyphosate work as a herbicide, or how does it? Because if it is a metal chelator, and we know that a lot of these metals are needed for health and everything, does it go into these plants and basically is the main function of how it kills the weeds that it just kind of pulls out all of the metals and that ends up just killing the plants themselves? Or what is the function of actually how it kills a weed?
That's a good question also. And the metal is part of the problem. It definitely messes up your mineral metabolism extensively of all those important minerals. But the critical way that it kills a plant is through this enzyme called EPSP synthase. It's an enzyme in a pathway called the shikimate pathway, shikimate biological pathway. That's a super important pathway in the plants. And if that pathway is broken, the plant dies. So they think that's the main way that it kills the plant, is by disrupting that pathway. By blocking that enzyme, EPSP synthase. And then they say, well, it doesn't hurt us because our cells don't have that enzyme. They don't even have the entire pathway. It's absent from our cells. And that's a big reason why they think it's safe, because we don't have that pathway. But the problem is our gut microbes have that pathway, use that pathway to produce extremely important nutrients for the host. So when that pathway is suppressed in the gut microbes, then we become deficient in the critical outputs of that pathway. And those are the precursors to the neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, melatonin, the skin tanning agent, melanin, thyroid hormone, all of those come out of that pathway. And then, of course, it's the amino acids, the aromatic amino acids, tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine are the core products of that pathway that are essential coding amino acids for all the proteins. So they can become deficient too. So when you have deficiencies in the neurotransmitters and the skin tanning agent and the thyroid hormone, and then those critical amino acids, you've got a lot of problems, just from the gut microbes getting messed up by the glyphosate.
And so how does that end up causing autism, right? Because you said you had this correlation, and I've seen these charts before too, where you'll see it'll be a line chart, and you'll see the use of glyphosate going up, but then you also see the autism rates going up. And
Yes.
now it also correlates to, if you look at childhood vaccine schedule and there's other things that it does
Yes.
link to. But, I was getting, I was born in 86, and I'm sure that, I got a lot of vaccines as a kid. My parents didn't know, and, I don't vaccinate my kids now, of course. But so I know there's other correlations, but when you look at glyphosate, uh, how is it that glyphosate, according to your research, is so closely correlated to autism? Like what happens with the brain and everything that actually causes this?
Yeah, no, that's a very complicated story. I wrote an article. I published an article on glyphosate and autism quite recently. I think maybe 2025, 2024, linking glyphosate to autism. And I referenced a lot of papers that have been studying glyphosate. They've been finding autism-like symptoms in mice exposed to glyphosate, and also anxiety, which is often associated with autism. It messes up the thyroid system, so thyroid hormone issues in the mom even can be a risk factor for autism. The critical thing, I think, is sulfate. And that's where I have my book here, Toxic Legacy, How the Weed Killer Glyphosate is Destroying Our Health and the Environment. And in that book, I go into a lot of detail about sulfate. And I know we mentioned sulfate before we started, but sulfate is critical. And in fact, what I would say is that glyphosate, what I believe is that glyphosate is messing up the sulfation pathways and the methylation pathways, those two entire systems in the body, both of which are incredibly important for the health, and in particular the health of mitochondria. And so, and it gets into some very interesting side branches into deuterium, which we can get to in a moment. But I believe that glyphosate has a insidious cumulative toxic effect of getting into proteins by mistake in place of glycine. And this is a very controversial topic. The industry claims that it has disproved, put to rest, this can't be happening. And I don't believe it has. And in fact, the paper that is pointed to say that it's not happening actually shows that it is happening. So I've written about that on my MIT webpage. But I very interesting story, because the glyphosate is a glycine molecule. It's a complete glycine. Glycine is the smallest amino acid. It's very important in lots of proteins. It plays a critical role. Because it's small, it's chosen to go in certain places where you need to have room for stuff to go around. And in fact, the enzyme EPSP synthase, which glyphosate suppresses, it has a glycine residue highly conserved at the place where it binds phosphate in PEP. So it needs to have room for that phosphate, which is quite a bulky, construction. It's not quite a molecule, but anion, I suppose. Trying to get the right terminology there. So the phosphate anion needs to fit into this socket that the enzyme makes room for by having this tiny glycine residue there. And if you take that glycine, they can actually replace that glycine with alanine, which they've done. Alanine has an extra methyl group, so it's a little bit bigger than glycine, still pretty small. But that extra methyl group prevents glyphosate from suppressing that enzyme at all. It completely shuts glyphosate down. It doesn't just make it weaker, it makes it gone. It doesn't work at all. And the reason is because the code changed. It's not because the alanine is bigger. I mean, that's what I think. The code changed because once you no longer have the code for glycine, glyphosate can't substitute for glycine. And when glyphosate substitutes for glycine, it puts its methylphosphonate piece, which is the extra thing it has on its nitrogen atom, puts it into that place where the phosphate is supposed to go. It blocks the substrate, PEP, from binding, gets in the way by virtue of being inside the protein itself, the enzyme. Do you see what I'm saying? People have a little trouble with that because it's a little bit technical, but it's very, very interesting.
It kind of makes sense to me, because I've interviewed a lot of smart people and a lot of doctors that have talked about just various just kind of functions in terms of how the cells work and how there are certain kind of receptors that are matching, right, certain things coming in, and sometimes you might have something that is maybe toxic that comes in that may be the same, very similar shape to the beneficial thing that's supposed to be kind of coming in there, and then the toxin replaces it and it takes over, basically. And so, I mean, again, it's very elementary, but okay.
No, but that's true. That happens a lot. But this is different from replacing the substrate, because they'll talk about it replacing the substrate, or the thing that matches to the receptor. The enzyme is actually trying to break down PEP, but it needs to get that phosphate in close so it can do it. It has to get near to the neighbors so it can get broken down. And the phosphate won't fit because the glyphosate has taken up that space. but the glyphosate is actually inside the enzyme. I think it's inside the enzyme. They say it's outside the enzyme. It's replacing the PEP. As a substrate, just like you're saying, it gets in the way of the PEP because it's taken up the PEP spot, in the universe instead of the actually going into the enzyme itself. That's the part that I say goes into the enzyme itself. And once you take that hypothesis and run with it, you find all kinds of other enzymes that also bind phosphate at a place where glycine is highly conserved. So that's sort of my glyphosate susceptibility motif. I talk about that in my book. And once you say, okay, supposing glyphosate is doing that in other proteins as well, which ones would be affected? And you get a huge list. And you find that those proteins often are connected to a disease that's going up dramatically. Like that disease is caused by a defect in that protein. Glyphosate introduces a defect in that protein, causing that disease. And now you have all these diseases that are going up dramatically. We have a huge list now of diseases and conditions that are going up dramatically in recent times, exactly in step with glyphosate. It is quite incredible,
So
that list.
so it's not just that it's a poison in the same way that, say, you hypothetically your child drank some bleach, right? Where it's like, okay, get this out. This is a poison. It's going to lead to cell death, and this is really bad. It's more so that glyphosate is almost, it's like if our body had an operating system, if we had a code, right, that was written to make our body work in a certain way, that what glyphosate is doing is it's actually going in and it's fundamentally messing up that code, and it's causing things to not work properly anymore, and it's causing kind of cascading damage to us from at a very, very fundamental level of our cells and what's inside of our bodies. Is that
I think that's right. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, so I have not been able to find a single other molecule, and I've looked hard, that also substitutes for glycine during protein synthesis. Not a single one, only glyphosate. But there are several different examples of poisons that are really exotic and cause a lot of weird symptoms that work by substituting for another amino acid, not glycine. But there's several other amino acids that there are poisons that substitute, but they get into proteins by mistake in place of that amino acid. There's several of them. And in fact, glufosinate, which is another herbicide, it substitutes for glutamate. And so I think that it's a principle of a really, really bad toxin. If you can find something that will substitute for an amino acid in a protein, that is a really nasty toxin. And so the fact that it does happen for other amino acids. It's just that I have never seen anything else that does it to glycine, which is what makes glyphosate incredibly special, because it's like the only molecule I know of that does that.
And so glycine, if I understand correctly, because I've done a little bit of research and some interviews about glycine, I know that, right, I believe, based upon my understanding, is that glycine is also a very critical amino acid in terms of inflammation, our body's ability to heal itself, and that a lot of people don't have enough glycine because again, from what I recall, that you find glycine in a lot of protein, a lot of animal meat, but it's more concentrated in the bones and the organ meats. It's less concentrated in the muscle meats, which is, the culture here in America is different.
Yeah.
I've traveled a lot of places in the world, and a lot of the other places, they prioritize the organ meat. They prioritize
I know.
if you go to Hong Kong and you watch how they eat lobster, they're eating the brains and they're eating the stuff where
Right.
there's going to be, or the fish, same thing. Whereas we just want the really nice, clean, the filet mignon, the muscle meat. And so I think a lot of us already have a glycine deficiency from that. But I know that if you supplement and you take glycine, it really helps with inflammation, brain fog, a lot of these issues. And so I'd imagine that even if you're getting a lot of glycine from, say, bone broths and organ meat, am I correct in understanding that if you still have a lot of glyphosate coming in, then that glycine is not going to even be able to take action, right? So you're going to have a lot of cascading health issues, even from that simple point of your body not being able to get the amino acid glycine.
Yeah, the Chinese like to eat pig's feet and shark fin.
Oh yeah,
Those are
chicken feet.
really loaded with glycine. And so, and they're very popular in the Chinese culture. They understand that you need a lot of glycine. And you're right, the bone broth is also a really good source. I think glycine deficiency is a worse problem because of glyphosate, because if you don't have enough, if you have enough glycine, it'll sort of outcompete the glyphosate and get into the protein, more likely to get in, right? If your glycine is deficient and you've got this glyphosate lying around, that gives the glyphosate a much better opportunity to substitute and cause trouble. And glyphosate substituting for glycine and collagen, I think, is a big deal. And that's where I think how we can understand the increase we've seen. We've seen a dramatic increase in lots of issues with, problems with your bones and joints, right? Even like this prolapse, that you have this, your muscles can't even hold up your abdomen anymore. You have this prolapse problem. I mean, there's like, and of course, a lot of back pain and knee surgery, hip surgery. I mean, all these issues with the bones and joints. I think it's because a major player, again, is glyphosate substituting for glycine in collagen. Collagen has a huge amount of glycine. Huge long stretches of collagen are GXY. For every third amino acid is a glycine. And that's essential for the collagen to form its beautiful crystalline structure that gives it its special properties that make it so useful around those joints and holding water and the tensile strength. All the different properties of collagen come about because of that triple helix structure. And if you put glyphosate in there instead of glycine, the structure doesn't work anymore. It falls apart. And I think that's what's causing all these issues with
Even
people having these
arthritis
problems.
and joint pain, right? I'm sure a lot of these things are.
Yeah, I think they trace back to glyphosate contamination in collagen. And in fact, Anthony Samsel actually got a sample of a horse's hoof from a horse that died of founder. Founder is a hoof problem. Horse's hoof has a lot of collagen in it, and he found glyphosate contamination in that horse's hoof.
Interesting. Gosh, so it's like, okay, if where my mind goes into is I tend to kind of go towards the more conspiratorial. Is there some sort of bigger, darker agenda? And it's like, well, it's like glyphosate seems to be one of these things that is probably easy for them to say, hey, it's not toxic in the way that's going to kill plants. It's okay, but it causes because you're affecting at the fundamental level, the cellular level, that it causes so many different illnesses that you can't necessarily pinpoint and say, oh, your arthritis is caused by glyphosate, right? So for a lot of the chemical companies, which are also the pharmaceutical companies, there's this very kind of incestuous relationship with these giant corporations that glyphosate, if they keep glyphosate in the food supply, it's going to make sure there's a lot of people that need a lot of prescription medication, a lot of very expensive treatments. So I'm sure it really helps keep the
I
pharmaceutical
know.
industry churning, right? So you
That's
could
so
say,
insidious, isn't it? It's so interesting that the same industry that poisons us is the industry that feeds us all these pills to try to keep us healthy. It's silly. It's really insidious. Yeah, glyphosate is a slow kill. I mean, this is what I feel. It sort of gradually builds up in your proteins. It gets throughout your body, and sort of long-standing proteins. Once they get a glyphosate in there, they're just stuck with it, and it's going to mess them up. Other proteins are getting broken down. The glyphosate gets recycled. It goes into a different protein. It wanders around your body putting bullets in all these different proteins, and certain ones get really messed up by it. And that's how the sulfation pathway has several enzymes that are critically, they have that glyphosate susceptibility motif in several different enzymes involved in sulfation pathways. And so I think it's blocking the sulfation pathways and starting in the gut. And that's a huge problem because the sulfomucins that are produced by the colonocytes lining the colon, those sulfomucins are really important to feed Akkermansia, which is a bug, a microbe that's turned out to be, they've recently discovered Akkermansia is a really important, positive influence on your gut. Akkermansia's only food is the sulfomucins that are produced by the colonocytes. So there's a kind of symbiotic relationship where the Akkermansia eats the sulfomucins and breaks them down into small organic molecules. And then other microbes turn those small molecules into short chain fatty acids. So there's a whole process going on in the gut. And those microbes that produce the short chain fatty acids are really crucial for supplying food to the colonocytes. So there's a complete circle where the colonocytes make the sulfomucins, the Akkermansia eats the sulfomucins, hands it over to these other microbes who make the butyrate, and butyrate is food of the god for the colonocytes. They love butyrate. It's like 70% of their food supply if they're lucky. And butyrate is deficient in association with all kinds of different diseases, including things like rheumatoid arthritis and autism. I mean, lots of different diseases have a butyrate deficiency problem. Akkermansia produces a protein called P9 that stimulates the release of GLP-1 and GLP by the host cells. GLP-1 is the hormone that got all these analogs of GLP-1 that people are taking like candy to try to get skinny. There's all these GLP-1, what do they call it? Receptor analogs, right? You know about those. They are
yeah.
basically a simulated GLP-1. like what
Ozempic,
are
one
they?
of the big ones.
Ozempic, and yeah, exactly. And so, that those have become very popular as a way to lose weight. And of course, they're also ruining the gut. So it's really scary to me that people are taking all those drugs because their body's not releasing enough GLP-1. And that's likely because acromantia, both butyrate and acromantia's P9 stimulate the release of GLP-1. And the butyrate synthesis is broken by glyphosate because glyphosate raises the pH of the blood, of the gut. That's been shown in studies. When you raise the pH, it's not acidic anymore. Those acid-loving microbes don't thrive. Those are the ones that make the butyrate. So you end up with a low butyrate supply, a low supply of the sulfomucins, and then the akkermansia doesn't thrive. And now you've got a real mess because you start getting all these pathogens overgrowing, and you get an inflammatory situation. Because the immune cells are trying to fight off the pathogens, and the pathogens are thriving because the good guys are getting destroyed by the glyphosate. It's quite a mess. So the gut dysbiosis is central to glyphosate's problems.
And how does this tie in to autism? You mentioned crossing the gut-brain barrier, which maybe can you explain the gut-brain barrier, then how autism ties into all of this?
Yeah, no, autism is very, very complicated. But one crucial thing with autism is sulfate. And let me just tell you that there was a woman named Rosemary Waring who studied autism way back in the 1990s, and she wrote papers talking about this sulfate problem. She said there's got to be something wrong with the sulfation system in these autistic kids. And she actually did measures from the urine and found out they had sky high levels of some metabolites of sulfur that are not sulfate, thiosulfate and sulfite. We're like 50 times as high as what they were in the normal kids. And meanwhile, sulfate was actually being flushed also in the urine. So high levels of sulfate in the urine and low levels of sulfate in the blood. And then she says, there's got to be some kind of sulfation problem here that they can't sulfate things. So there's this critical pathway that attaches sulfate to other molecules. And lots of times you attach sulfate to a molecule that's not water soluble. And by adding a sulfate to it, it makes it water soluble. That's actually true for vitamin D, for example, vitamin D sulfate. You can put sulfate onto vitamin D, and now you can just ship it out in the blood without having to package it up inside a lipid particle. Same thing with cholesterol. Cholesterol sulfate is able to travel freely in the blood. Cholesterol has to be packaged up inside an LDL particle. Now you've got high to LDL because you don't have enough sulfate. Do you see what I'm saying? Because you can't sulfate the cholesterol, so you can't just ship it out. You have to put it inside a particle, your LDL goes up, and now you get on the statin drug. So glyphosate is messing up the sulfation system by virtue of getting into these proteins that I told you about that have this glyphosate susceptibility motif. The Rosemary Waring wrote about it way back when, and she thought they had a problem with sulfation in the gut. And then much more recently, there was a lovely paper that came out that actually demonstrated autistic kids had deficiencies in the sulfation pathways in the gut, in the blood, and in the brain. And the really critical thing was the heparan sulfate in the brain. This paper actually looked at autistic brains post-mortem and found a severe deficiency in sulfation in the brain ventricles of these autistic kids. And that is really crucial because there's also these mice that have, they breed true to autism. They have these mice that they study, and they also have extremely low heparan sulfate in their brain ventricles. Heparan sulfate in the brain ventricles is critical for the brain development. It orchestrates the maturation of the neurons to turn into a brain during development in utero. And so if you've got insufficient sulfation in the brain, that's a huge problem with respect to the development of the brain. And it doesn't develop normally. So that's just one part of the story. I mean, there's other parts too. There's melatonin is another one, because glyphosate has been shown in mice to suppress melatonin synthesis. Even these mice were exposed in utero. And even after they were teenagers, if you will, they still had a major melatonin deficiency. And melatonin, of course, is related to sleep. So autistic kids have a lot of sleep problems. Melatonin is a product of the shikimate pathway. So just by disrupting the shikimate pathway, glyphosate reduces the levels of melatonin. And glyphosate also attacks the pineal gland. I told you about the aluminum. It brings the aluminum into the pineal gland, wrecks it. The pineal gland has to release melatonin to get you to sleep, right? And these autistic kids are all popping melatonin pills to try to sleep because their pineal gland is not working properly. It's getting poisoned by glyphosate, poisoned by aluminum, and it doesn't have enough ability to make melatonin.
I see. And so basically, when you're looking at autism, right, looking at it from this perspective, that it's of all the different healthy components that a brain needs to operate correctly, that glyphosate is it's basically, well, so you say it's passing the gut brain barrier. So am I correct in understanding that what that means is that you have food, or you have all these different, say microbes and healthy and good and bad bacteria, they're all in your gut, that when that happens, leaky gut, right? Is it basically that a lot of those bad things can enter into the bloodstream, they can
Right,
get up into
exactly.
the brain? Is that what that means?
That's absolutely right. Yes. In fact, that's one thing that happens because glyphosate has been shown to cause a leaky gut. And also glyphosate disrupts the metabolism of proteins. So these microbes, there's these microbes called lactobacillus, and they express a number of different proteins that can break proline apart from the other amino acids. Proline is a difficult amino acid to break, and the normal enzymes that break the protein into individual amino acids. Protein is a chain of amino acids, and you chop it up into individual amino acids, then you can use them to make new proteins. That's sort of the whole process of digesting proteins. And glyphosate disrupts that process, particularly for proline, because we depend upon these proline breaking down enzymes that are produced by lactobacillus. And lactobacillus gets clobbered by glyphosate, partly because of magnesium, because they depend upon, I think I'm worried it's manganese, one of those two, manganese or magnesium, that they depend upon critically, and that's a reason why glyphosate damages those lactobacillus, as well as they have that shikimate pathway. So they're getting hit hard by glyphosate, and they normally would provide this enzyme that would help you break down gluten and casein, because those have lots of proline in them. And now you've got gluten intolerance, casein intolerance, because those proteins can't get broken down. They get stuck on the proline. And now you have a short peptide sequence containing proline that is not foreign. It's not human. And you have the leaky gut. So that protein just wanders out into the circulation. And the immune cells get mad. They say, oh my God, there's this foreign protein. And they attack it. And they develop antibodies to match that protein. Turns out there's human proteins that have similar sequences, and particularly the thyroid is affected by that. And so these immune cells, they're nearsighted. They start attacking the thyroid because they think it looks like the protein that's the foreign one, but it's a mistake. And then you get thyroid issues. So there's like the whole gluten intolerance thing with the celiac disease. I think glyphosate is a major reason why we have an epidemic in that. And in fact, I wrote a paper together with Anthony Sampson where we showed a really good correlation between the use of glyphosate on wheat going up over time and the rise in celiac disease over time. That matches better than the use of glyphosate on corn and soy. And wheat, of course, is the one that is associated with the celiac disease. And so, and they use glyphosate on wheat right before harvest, and all the wheat-based products have lots of glyphosate in them, cookies and whatnot, bread. If you don't do it
Cereal.
organic, yeah, all right, you're getting a lot of glyphosate. So I think it's clear to me that glyphosate is the primary cause of the gluten intolerance problem.
But I'm sure it's another thing that big pharma is going to have some sort of magical solution for, right? Here's take this drug, it's going to help you with this. Yes, the world is getting crazier every day. We know that. Every time you check the news, another crisis, conflict. So you can't control what happens out there. You should know that by now, but you can control how you prepare for it. You can make sure no matter what happens, you have the basics covered in each one of these disasters that could reach your doorsteps. Things like having food to eat when the shelves are empty. That's a big one. So when it comes to food security, My Patriot Supply is a great option out there for you. Very affordable. They've helped millions of Americans get prepared. They've got over 90,000 five-star reviews. Right now, you can get their best-selling 3-month emergency food supply for $100 off. They rarely do deals like this. To check it out, if you want to get stock up, just get a 3-month supply. Highly recommend having it at least a month. Honestly, at least get to a month. 3 months is great. If you want to check it out, go to Prepare with MIA, Made in America. So preparewithmia.com. The food kit gives you about 2,000 calories a day, lasts up to 25 years. And again, it's $100 off. So preparewithmia.com and go get yours right now. And also I saw recently that they were spraying glyphosate on national forests. Did you see that?
Oh, I know. Oh my God, my friends are screaming about that. Yeah, that's so terrible. I think that, well, they've been doing that for a long time. Certainly up in Canada, in the forest industry, the people who make the toilet paper, yeah, the industry in Canada, they've been using glyphosate for a long time. And there's a really weird disease that's been showing up in New Brunswick, in an area that where they're spraying the glyphosate in the forest. And these people, the young people, are developing an ALS-like syndrome. They're becoming completely incapacitated in large numbers. And there's been a lot of controversy around it. And there was I think, a doctor who was saying, I think it's glyphosate. He really started to point to glyphosate. And then the government shut the whole thing down. They just stopped the research. I'm sure because that industry is so powerful there. The forest industry basically, probably made sure that you don't finger them because, they have to use their glyphosate to do. They want to kill the hardwood trees. And it's what's going on with these forest fires. They stripped off everything with a forest fire, and then you put the glyphosate in, and that's going to kill off all these hardwood trees that they don't want them to grow because they want to plant a whole bunch of fast growing trees. It's terrible, and it's really terrible. And I really hope that the people who are protesting that can get their message out. And I'm glad you're showing this. It's really, really disturbing.
And so you mentioned Canada, you mentioned toilet paper. So are you saying that they're using glyphosate in the process, like almost in the logging process, to generate toilet paper? So
toilet paper probably has glyphosate.
That's my question. I'm thinking because we recently
so.
switched to like a really healthy toilet paper because we're on a septic system, and we actually we're just replacing it soon. Our leach field is kind of it's 30 years old, and so but we're switching to this really kind of healthy. It's like a light brown colored toilet paper, which is not chemically bleached and everything. So if they're using glyphosate in toilet paper production, I mean, we know that, for instance, looking at microplastics, that if women are wearing synthetic yoga pants, it affects fertility, right? And so I imagine that the anus is an area of the body that will absorb what you put on.
Well, you know what's worse? What's worse is tampons. They've actually tested tampons and found glyphosate in them.
Oh, goodness.
You think about that one. That is really, really bad. I think that might be contributing to our infertility problems.
Wow, because you're thinking that you could be eating
a really good place to absorb. It'll absorb very nicely in there, right? And you hit right into the reproductive system. I mean, we've got a big problem with infertility, and a growing problem. And I think glyphosate's a major player.
Gosh, so I'm thinking I'll have to do some research on that, because I'm thinking, gosh, a toilet paper has glyphosate in it. You could be thinking, hey, you're doing everything right. You're eating organic. You got chickens, whatever. But if you're still using toilet paper,
or
even imagine Kleenex tissues. I'm thinking about all these paper products that we use, if they've got glyphosate in them, that's a nightmare.
Isn't it? Yeah, and even the clothing. I've started to try to buy organic clothing, and I think about the children, organic clothing for the children, because it's glyphosate exposure right on the skin. It's pretty amazing how. And I'll tell you, that's also in the air, because I actually collected a sample of water at my office at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Rainwater from the rain, sent it off to Anthony Samsel. He found glyphosate in it.
I've been seeing that also. Actually, I just found an article. I just did a quick search. This is from 2022.
Oh boy!
So there's evidence of PFAS in toilet paper. So the testing is finding fluorine, an indicator of PFAS in brands of toilet paper.
That PFAS is a monster too, and I'm sure that with the soil, the people in Maine, all the organic farmers in Maine, it was so sad that they had these forever chemicals contaminating their soil from something that happened many years ago.
Wow. And just what's crazy with this is, so my wife and I, we've been watching a lot of documentaries recently, and there's a documentary that came out called, I think it's called The Devil We Know. And it was specifically looking at the DuPont plant and their and Teflon. And basically what you see, though, especially here in America, in Europe, you don't see this. In Europe, they ban these chemicals before they're even used in the public. But here in America, because we have this revolving door between, say, big chemical, big pharma, and EPA, FDA, that they, then you have the grass, generally regarded as safe, which is allowing these companies to put in whatever they want to, that these companies are able to get away with putting highly carcinogenic and just terrible chemicals into the products. And, they might make $30 billion on the product. They get in trouble and they pay a $400 million fine.
I know. They don't mind. Just like, who cares, right? They just don't think about the fact that they're killing people. It's really true. I mean, this country, we're a very wealthy country. We're very prosperous in all this, but we're so sick. And to have to deal with all these people being so sick is just a huge burden on our society. You think of all these kids, the autistic rate is through the roof. I think it's like 1 in 30 or something now, right? 131 or something like that.
Well, and I've heard that I think they're saying that by 2050 or so, they're thinking it'll be 1 in 2 will be
I've been
autistic.
saying that. I've actually been saying 1 in 2 by 2032, which is possibly an exaggeration, but at the rate at which it was growing, that's where it would end up. If it continued at that same rate, I just did the math. It was quite simple math. 2032, that children born in 2032. So that would be more like 8-year-olds in 2040,
Yeah.
autism rate of 50%, and that will be 80% of the boys. I mean, it's completely unacceptable, and we have to fix the autism problem. I'm so glad that Kennedy is so focused on that. I mean, he hasn't been as focused lately, maybe, but he knows he needs to solve that problem. And I feel like I have the answer. It's the vaccines, the acetaminophen, and the glyphosate. End of story, I think.
And
I mean, of
so,
course, there's all the other chemicals as
of
well, which aren't
course, yeah.
helping.
Yeah. Well, you even mentioned what's coming down in the skies. I know a lot of people have done, lab tests of the rainwater coming down because, of course, they're spraying these same chemicals. Whether you want to get, think of it as a conspiracy or not, it's happening, right? You can measure through rainwater high levels of barium and strontium and aluminum
Yeah,
and chemicals that shouldn't be up in our rainwater. And so,
right.
but one of the big questions that I have is, it's like, unless you live in a bubble, unless you build a dome over your house and you
I
never
know.
leave, you're not going to be able to stop yourself from coming into contact with this. And
I
so,
know. That's very sobering, isn't it? That's what I feel like. We live in an environment where there are poisons everywhere. And how do we navigate that space,
oh, it's so, because I've got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and
Yeah.
so we do our best to get organic clothing, and but for a lot of people, especially now with where inflation's at and the cost of
I
living,
know.
paying the 30% premium for organic clothing, especially if you're buying kids clothes that you use them for 3 months if you're lucky before
Right.
they grow
That's
out of
a
them
really
or
good
they
point.
get torn or whatever. It's not easy. And so,
Yeah.
but in terms of looking at the solutions, how obviously eating organic as much as possible, doing, kind of controlling the input of these chemicals into our body is key. And that's what I focus on that a lot, both on the show and also within my own family life. But in terms of how to get rid of these chemicals in us, have you studied that much at all? Are there any things that you've come
Yeah.
across
I mean, I
in terms
have
of?
friends who have recommended things. And one thing is to get a high glycine diet, get a lot of glycine in your diet, because that'll help with the glyphosate substitution problem. So that could be a good thing to do.
Which bone
Uh,
broth I know is one of the key things for glycine, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And of course, I mentioned sulfur. I'm obsessed with sulfur because I think that sulfur deficiency is systemic. It starts in the plants, by the way, because glyphosate, and that's not one thing Don Huber talked about. The sulfur levels were way down in the plants that were exposed to glyphosate compared to the ones that weren't, way down. So you're getting insufficient sulfur in your diet. And then, of course, that's going to impact the sulfation pathway, which is critical for autism. So I eat tons of garlic, onions, garlic, and also seafood and grass-fed beef, um, foods that contain eggs. Organic eggs are great. Get the high end eggs.
Well,
Everything you
we
buy
raise
needs to be
chickens
high
and
end.
we feed them organic
That's
feed, and
fantastic.
a lot of what they're eating is, we live in the forest, so they're just eating
It's
bugs off the
wonderful.
forest floor, and our eggs are, they're the, I mean, here I have for some reason I have a stud finder on my desk, but the eggs are like, the yolks are this color, like they're like a deep
Yes.
orangey yellow, and
I remember one time I actually compared a non-organic egg with an organic egg, and I opened the both up and looked at it, and the white part was very fluid in the non-organic egg. The yolk was small, the yolk was pale, and the organic egg, the white was very thick. The yolk was dark red, dark orange. It was huge and much bigger. It was a huge difference between those two eggs. I just did that as a little experiment. It's clear that the organic eggs are far superior to the
yes,
non-organic eggs. And
and so
especially, like you say, eating the bugs. I mean, the chickens need to get the good diet as well.
yes. Oh, and they get all of our food scraps, and our chicken pen
That's
kind of
wonderful.
wraps around our garden, and so whenever we're cleaning out the garden, we're
I want to
strewn
move
things
into your
over.
house.
Yeah, yes, yeah,
That sounds
yeah.
great.
And we're doing our best. I mean, it's not easy.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
and
great.
so
We need
sulfur.
more. You make it a good example for other people to try to follow
Well,
your
that's what I
model,
try to do. Is a lot of people
Yeah.
I'll bump into, or I'll see comments, and they'll say, "Oh, look, we've been watching your show, and we moved out. We sold up, from living in the suburbs. We're on, 5 acres. We have a little, small home on 5 acres, and we have chickens, and
I
everyone
know
says it's just the happiest transformation in their way of life."
I really want to see a movement. I want to see more and more people thinking of that as a way to live.
Yeah,
to get off the grid, to get out, out of the city and just get away from all that toxic stuff and make your own, like you say, buy a bunch of acres and make your own space where you can avoid a lot of it.
exactly. And so you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned adding sulfur into your diet.
Mm-hmm.
So that as something that seems to make sense based upon our conversation so far. That if so,
Sulfation
sulfur,
deficiency.
glycine. So these are things that glyphosate is causing a deficiency. So okay, we want to
Right.
supplement to counteract that. Now,
Yes.
and what about? Are there any ways of detoxing and pulling glyphosate out of the body?
I have friends who recommend things that they think work, and they're kind of traditional things that try to detox. So like bentonite clay
Yes.
binders, bentonite clay. Um, what's it called? Oh, I've forgotten the word now. Um, shoot, there's these complicated organic molecules in the soil. Um, I'm having a senior moment here. I usually just rolls right off my tongue, but I can't remember what it is. I want to say sulfomucins. I'm stuck on that, and it's not right at all. So anyway, maybe it'll come to me in a moment, but it's not coming. But sauerkraut juice was an interesting one. There were some cows that were treated with bentonite clay and sauerkraut juice. Um, and they sauerkraut juice, of course, is a fermented food, and I hypothesize that it might have microbes in it that can fully break down glyphosate, because there's not many microbes that know how to break down glyphosate. It has a tough bond, a CP carbon phosphorus bond that's very tough, and our cells don't know what to do with that, so we can't break it down. But there are a few microbes that can, and there's strains of Acetobacter that can do that. And so Acetobacter is a common microbe in sauerkraut juice. So actually, apple cider vinegar and sauerkraut are things that I also like to try to eat. Fermented foods in general, even fermented dairy, I think is excellent.
Yeah.
And I like dairy too. I eat both dairy and wheat. I mean, I have no problem with tolerance of gluten and casein, and I like both of them. My diet is general, but I eat a lot of animal-based foods. I mean, as I said, organic eggs, grass-fed beef, and any kind of organic, not organic seafood. You sort of can't get organic seafood, but wild caught, wild caught fish, and all the seafoods are very healthy because they have a lot of sulfur, they have a lot of minerals. You want to look for foods that are rich in micronutrients, because we have a systemic deficiency of micronutrients, especially if we're eating the stupid processed foods, eating
Oh
soy
yeah.
protein bars and things like
Oh
that.
yeah.
It's terrible.
Well, even with fish, actually, just last night I made we had what we had quinoa and king salmon. So there's
Perfect.
we just entered into the season. We can get king salmon. But actually, a couple of weeks ago, I was at the local shop and they had organic king salmon from New Zealand, and I thought,
Oh my
I'm
goodness,
not touching
organic.
that because it's farmed. That's the only way they
I
can
know.
say that
If it's
it's
organic,
still
it has to be
farmed.
farmed. Yeah, that's
Yeah, so we
exactly
always
right.
go wild caught, but also
Yeah.
kimchi, because
Yes,
one of my
that's
main kind
good.
of show sponsors is this woman named Kim Bright, wonderful woman, and she has this product Kimchi One, which is these little capsules, and actually I pulled her up because we've covered it extensively. That so
Yeah,
kimchi
yeah.
contains, this is a quick search actually, that kimchi's fermentation process could contribute to breaking down glyphosate due to the presence of this
I think
specific
that,
microbe.
yeah, I think that may be true. Yes. I don't think it's lactobacillus because I don't think they can break it down, but it could be Acetobacter.
Yeah, she said it's uh, potentially a Lactobacillus plantarum.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't think they can break down glyphosate, but I might be wrong. There are very few microbes that can.
yeah,
Acetobacter is one. Pseudomonas aeruginosa is another one, which is a problem.
yeah,
Pseudomonas aeruginosa is a very big problem in the hospitals as a bug, as a pathogen, and it can break down glyphosate. I actually think that's why it's so successful as a pathogen. It's
mm,
helping the host by clearing the glyphosate, but then it's causing nasty symptoms.
yeah.
So
But
you don't get something for nothing.
what's encouraging with this is that if you look at the solutions for this, it just go back to how humans are supposed to live,
I
right?
know, that's
It's
right.
actually it's get out of the big cities, get off of the processed food, stop eat. It's like eat in
Eat
season,
whole
eat
foods.
local,
Yes,
eat whole foods, eat healthy,
absolutely.
non-chemical. And the more you do that, and you change your lifestyle, which is that's what we've done. I mean, 6 years ago, I was living in a high rise in Manhattan, And so,
You
I mean,
made
it
quite
was,
a transition.
oh yeah, absolutely. And I grew
You
up in
should
the
write a book.
country. Yeah. Well, actually, I am. I'm writing a book. Literally, it's called Prep Like Noah, and it's looking at how to,
Oh, that's
basically
nice.
you see the coming signs of the flood, and so how
That's
do
I
you
like
build your
that.
ark,
I
right?
like that title.
Yeah. But that's
Yeah,
which is, it's encouraging actually, because I do think there is a movement of this. There's a huge increase in homeschooling, a huge
I
increase in
know.
homesteading. And so I think that the people that are aware of what's happening, they're tapping into this. And I hope that we just see that it continues. And that's a lot of what I try to do, is I try to be kind of add whatever fuel I can to that fire to get more people aware of
Yeah.
just the importance of these lifestyle changes, and how just your lifestyle change in of itself can lead to much healthier children, healthy environment, healthy
Yeah, and
bodies.
that's so important. It really should be number one. I'm really, I'm thinking these poor people who graduated in computer science and know how to write a lot of code that's useless. They should just, think of buying a small family farm and starting, organic and doing the whole bit. I think it would be a wise move. it's
Oh,
it's
I
funny to
agree.
say that, but because all this technology skill is not really very useful anymore.
Well,
It's sobering to think that.
there's a friend of mine. So he's an Indian guy. He's married to a Canadian woman, and they live 5 minutes away, right from where we are. And about 2 years ago, they bought an organic farm up here, and so he's like very advanced, kind of PhD level in computer science, and
Yeah.
he's
Yeah, there you go.
he's working in like AI, like very high level AI analytics for like in the banking industry. Yet they both, and he still does it, but he's allowed to work remotely up here. But so they both live there, and it's kind of funny talking to him, because he's just this data guy. Yet I'll see him out there on his Kubota tractor, moving things around, but he's looking at it and he's applying this data science and computer science perspective to
That's
farming and
interesting.
organic growing. And he's looking at ways of how to optimize things and setting up automated systems
Yeah,
here. And so maybe these younger people that have these
that
computer
is really
science,
interesting.
they take that and apply it
Yeah.
to beekeeping, or apply it to,
Yeah. Well, certainly
you know,
farming, because I think that there are some sort of smart tractors that are showing up now that run on solar energy and they have vision navigation capabilities, navigation vision. They can actually be trained to recognize the weeds. Then they can sort of zap them with a red laser or some boiling water or something. I feel like there could be a solution to keep from having to hire a bunch of people to pull weeds, because that's what we don't want to do, right? I mean, we could do that, but instead we have all these people hired to take care of autistic kids. I mean, which one's
yeah.
better, right? Pulling weeds or taking care of autistic kids?
Oh,
I
I
don't know.
know. I know. Well, yeah, I mean, we've it's growing season for us, and I've spent a lot of time weeding, and my wife's saying, Seth, I told you should have put mulch down, 2 months ago. You should have
Yeah,
mulched that
yeah,
area. Now we've got all these weeds, but then we find out. So I'll identify the weeds, and I'll find out the weeds growing are edible, and they're actually really good. So lamb's quarters is one of them. There's all these weeds,
that's great.
sorrel that's
Yeah,
coming up, and we're saying, oh my
dandelion
goodness.
actually has
Oh,
beneficial
dandelion. Oh,
properties.
yeah. Yeah. So you
Yeah,
realize it's like, oh, actually, without even planting anything, there's just food
yeah.
that just wants to grow up on our property. And,
And the
and
weeds, I think, actually do a good job of servicing the soil, actually
they
refurbishing it.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I think it was the lamb's quarter or amaranth, one of those I was looking up, that it has a really deep tap root, similar to comfrey,
Mm.
right? So, and it pulls a lot of the minerals and nutrients up from very deep, and it brings them up into the surface. And so it's an amazing process of getting back to this, and just seeing,
Yeah.
wow, there's this beautiful design around us. And if you just embrace, I think how we were created to live and exist with nature, then
Yeah.
the solutions they're all around you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. I think we really need to understand that we can't fight nature. We need to go with nature, work with it, not against it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
So
so
you set a good example. I'm really pleased to know you and to know that people like you exist. And I hope there will become more of them in the future, because your work is very important.
well, thank you, and as is yours. So we're in two different kind of vastly different areas of kind of expertise
Yeah.
and research, but what you're doing is really important. And so, let me bring up your Substack. So you've got a
Hmm.
really, really fantastic Substack where you are posting a lot of this information that we're talking about. I'll make sure the links are in the show description. So this is just Stephanie Seneff at substack.substack.com. Also, then your website, stephanieseneff.net, where you have your blog, a lot of your information, et cetera, and also your book, right? So your recent book that just came
Yeah.
out, Toxic Legacy. So I encourage people. I think the biggest thing that I'd recommend is just education. It's like you may not understand why organic is important, but if you read about it and you start reading this information or watching these interviews like this, then you're like, oh, that makes sense. And then that's why, again,
Yeah.
why your work is so important is because you're educating people and you're a very intelligent person with this MIT background that you're tackling very complex issues, but these are really, really important issues.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm excited about the science, and I still have more to say, and I want to get the message out to as many people as possible. And the really important thing is to go organic. I think that's really number one as far as changing your food habits. Really look for that certified organic label, or as you say, wild caught salmon. Don't buy farm salmon.
Yeah. Yeah. And also just meeting your local farmers. 'Cause I found that there's a lot of the local farmers
Yes.
go to the farm market. And a lot of them, they're not certified organic, but if you ask them, they'll
Right.
say, "Oh, I don't spray, but I'm not going to mess with the whole process of being certified organic." So you
No,
find
it's
it,
expensive and annoying. Yeah,
yeah,
we have a lot of local farmers here that we buy from. Yeah, because they you have to just trust them. They say I don't use the chemicals, and you
yeah,
trust them. Which is
yeah.
nice, really.
It is. Well, Stephanie,
Yeah.
it has been such a pleasure speaking with you, and I thank you for your work that you're doing. I thank you for giving us your time today. And do you have any final thoughts as we close out?
I always forget to mention sunshine, but I want to say sunshine. I really believe the sun is healing, and I think people are trying to avoid the sun too much, using too much sunscreen, even sunglasses. Get out in the sunlight, every day. Really trying to spend some time outdoors. Ideally, if you're near the ocean, walk along the beach barefoot in the water. Really good grounding. I mean, that's about the healthiest thing you can do on a sunny day. Um, yeah, sunlight is important, and we've demonized the sun, which is really stupid.
Oh, I agree. Actually, because we homeschool, and so we have little kids always all over the place because we kind of host a lot of the different events. And I recently built a little waterfall pond area in our gardens, and there's frogs in it now. And so I was up there yesterday, and we had probably 6 little kids out in their underwear, just splashing in the full sun,
That's so
catching
great.
frogs, and it's like we've never used sunscreen once for our children, and
That's fantastic.
they've never gotten a sunburn
Yeah, I
because
mean, as long as you sort of build up a tan in the spring, and then by the time
yeah,
summer's there, your tan is protective. And whereas if you don't get a tan because you keep using sunscreen, now you've got every time you don't wear the sunscreen, you're in trouble in summer, right? Because you
yeah,
don't have that natural protection.
yeah.
So
Not to mention
yeah,
the carcinogens that are in a lot of the sunscreen, which is a whole
I
different
know.
issue.
Well, actually, the skin cancer is going up, melanoma is going up in step with the rise in the use of sunscreen, which is
Yeah.
pretty weird.
Yeah, and even sunglasses can cause skin cancer because
Yeah.
what I've come
Oh,
across
wow.
is that
Yeah.
because your eyes are your eyes are one of the main ways that the sunlight gets into your body, and when you're filtering it through
Yes.
the sun through the if your eyes are not perceiving that it's a sunny day, your skin's not responding appropriately.
Ah,
So if
that's
you're out in the sun all day with your
fascinating.
sunglasses on, your body's not responding to that sun appropriately. Your body is thinking
Wow.
it's a cloudy day, and so that also
That's
is
very interesting. I had not known that. That's
yeah,
really, really
yeah.
interesting. Yeah. And of course, the sunlight reaches the pineal gland via the eyes,
Yeah,
and the pineal gland needs that sunlight. It helps to stimulate the pineal gland to make sulfate, which it needs in order to make melatonin sulfate, which it delivers to the brain. It delivers both the melatonin and the sulfate to the brain at night when you sleep.
exactly. Well, there you go. Well, Stephanie, thanks again. It was such a wonderful discussion with you, and I look forward to having you on again. And I hope people go out and they buy your book and they subscribe to your Substack and just seek the information you're putting out because it's really important information.
Great. This is a great discussion. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.